Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 3 deadline decisions. In this weekly series I take you through all of the latest news and talk you through your last minute questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming game week. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel and you enjoy this series, please do smash a like, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, before we jump into the content today, the guys over at Kickoff by Zuzu recently reached out to me and I'm actually surprised about how good their new gameplay format is. Kickoff by Zuzu is essentially a free-to-play app which complements fantasy football, and they've recently partnered with Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, if it's good enough for Ronaldo, it's certainly good enough for me. On your screen, you're going to see some gameplay from the previous game week between Newcastle and Manchester City, and the idea is pretty simple. It's in play, and you try and predict which team will dominate each phase of play based on things like shots on target and touches in the penalty area too, and you can compete with your friends to earn some bespoke, amazing prizes. On top of that, they also have a very exciting CR7 collection coming very soon, highlighting the best moments throughout his career, so do keep an eye out for that too. I genuinely am very much enjoying playing this game. As I said, it's free to play and it complements fantasy football, so there's really nothing to lose by giving it a download. Check the link in the pinned comment, the link in the description too. Give it a download, and if you do download Kickoff by Zuzu, let me know what you think of it down below in the comments. So guys, if you are interested in seeing my own team, I uploaded this morning my team selection ahead of Game Week 3. So if you're interested in what I'm doing with my 2 free transfers and 2.5 million in the bank, do go check out this video either before this one or after this one. It will be linked at the end. The first thing that I wanted to discuss is arguably the biggest dilemma for a lot of us ahead of Game Week 3, and that's the forward options, right? Most of us have, if not all of us have, Erling Haaland in our team. A lot of people playing probably a 3-5-2, which means you've got one more forward spot in your team. You maybe have a João Pedro or a Watkins in there already, and all of a sudden these two look like assets that you may want to hold on to, but we've also got the likes of Jackson, Wissa and Alvarez, and even Isak in the coming weeks that might look like good options too. So it's about, do you sell one good asset for another asset that you think might potentially be slightly better or might have slightly better fixtures, or do you just hold that forward for 1 or 2 more weeks and maybe use a transfer elsewhere? So what I've done here, because I don't think it's as simple as saying just this is the best forward in FPL at the moment. It really depends on what kind of manager you are and what your outlook is. And what I mean by that is, are you looking to bring in a short-term punt that you're potentially looking to switch around again in the near future? Or are you looking to bring in a player that you want to hold for the medium to long term? Because based on that, I think the answer as to who the best forward is in FPL to partner with Erling Haaland probably does change. So these are the things you need to think about at the moment, and it is completely dependent on your team. So what I've done is I've ranked from sort of the top 4 forward assets alongside Erling Haaland for 2 game weeks, 5 game weeks and 8+ game weeks, just to give you like a short-term punt, a medium-term punt or option, and then also someone for a little bit of the longer term if you just want to keep that forward forever. The way that I would think about whether you want a short-term option, medium or long-term is a couple of things. Number one, what kind of manager are you? Are you someone that likes to make lots of transfers, doesn't mind taking the odd hit and wants to take some risks? If so, bring in a short-term option. So that's the first thing. What kind of manager are you? And then the second thing you want to think about is where else in your team can you see yourself needing transfers over the coming weeks? For example, if your midfield is something like one Man United asset, Mbeumo, DRB, Foden, and Sterling or something like that, and you think you're really well set up in the midfield and you can't see yourself needing to make any transfers in the midfield, then maybe going for a short-term punt is probably the better idea, because you're not going to need transfers in the medium to long term, particularly on your midfield. So these are the things that I'm potentially thinking about. With all of that being said, let's go through the short-term, medium-term and long-term options. I think if you are looking to bring in someone just for the next couple of weeks and you are looking at high upside over Game Week 3, 4 and maybe even into Game Week 5, I do think it is Julian Alvarez. Yes, they've signed Doku now. Yes, Bernardo Silva is back and available. And yes, Alvarez will not start every game for Manchester City, but I still feel like with the options that they've got, Bernardo Silva only just coming back, Doku obviously probably being slowly integrated into the team. At the moment, City are basically playing with twin 10s. They're playing Foden and Alvarez as twin 10s. So yes, they can play Bernardo Silva there, but I'm looking at it and thinking I would expect Alvarez to start the next 2 games. I don't know that. Do not hold me to that, but that would be my prediction. So if you're looking for someone, Sheffield United away, Fulham at home, they are 2 excellent fixtures. They are 2 of the worst defences in the league as well. We expect them to be this season. Alvarez has got to be that guy for me if you're looking for a 2-week punt, but also Jackson does have really nice fixtures over the next 2 as well. Really, really decent fixtures. So I feel like realistically, if you are looking for a short-term option, it's got to be Alvarez or Jackson, but I would lean Alvarez if you are looking for just a shorter term option. Watkins actually, his fixture's not bad. Burnley and Liverpool. Burnley, we are expecting to be decent under Vincent Kompany. We haven't really seen enough of them yet to decide if they are going to be a solid defence. And Liverpool just aren't. They were 15th last season for expected goals conceded. They've started the season really poorly defensively too. They aren't a good defence, and Watkins could score goals against them. So I don't actually mind the next two for Watkins. And it's similar with Wissa. I don't think they're the best fixtures, but I certainly don't hate them. I do actually think Crystal Palace are going to be decent defensively this season, which is why he's in 4th as opposed to 3rd or 2nd. So short term, it's really got to be Alvarez. I think once you start to look more like 4, 5, 6 game weeks and you look beyond the first 2 or 3, I do think all of a sudden Alvarez has to drop down a little bit, not because of the fixtures, because City's fixtures are still very good up until around game week 8, game week 9, but just due to the minutes. As soon as the Champions League kicks in, we do not know what City are going to do with their team. Alvarez was actually playing a few games in the Champions League last season, so could he be favoured there? And maybe someone else favoured, like a Cole Palmer could be favoured in the Premier League as a result. So we don't know what's going to happen with City once the Champions League kicks in. And as a result, I just don't know how secure his minutes are. And again, once Bernardo Silva is back into the team and back fit, and once Doku is integrated, it's just a little bit too long term for me to say that Alvarez is a top option. And I think therefore, just due to how good Chelsea's fixtures are up until game week 8, I think if you're looking a little bit more medium term, it's got to be Jackson for me. So Jackson would be the one. And this is why, for me at the moment, my favoured FPL option alongside Haaland has to be Jackson. Just because when I'm looking at how far ahead I plan, and this is just my personal preference, I tend to say 4 to 6 game weeks. I don't think you want to look way beyond 6 game weeks, in my opinion, because you're almost planning too far ahead at this stage and you could miss out on points in the immediate future. But I also don't think you always want to look at like 1 and 2 game weeks ahead, because you find yourself needing to take hits and rush transfers, and you're constantly trying to put out fires as a result. So I feel like a 5 game week period is really nice. And as a result, Jackson is my favourite forward at the moment. I know a lot of people don't like him because they think he's going to be a terrible finisher, missed a few chances in the opening 2. People are calling him Darwin Nunez. And yes, he could be a terrible finisher. We don't really know. We haven't seen him at an elite level in the Premier League. But I think if he gets the amount of chances that he did in the opening 2, and I do think Chelsea will score goals with the fixtures they've got coming up, I think that Jackson will be involved in a higher percentage of goals than some of the other strikers. For example, Man City will score more goals than Chelsea. I definitely back that. But I feel like Jackson will be involved in a higher percentage of Chelsea's goals than Alvarez will with City's goals. So I think Jackson's a good option. Let me know down below what you think of Jackson. Wissa's got to be in there as well. I think Brentford's fixtures are really good. And I think there are 2 things that are putting us off with Wissa. And there's only 2 things. The first is that a lot of us own Brian Mbeumo, and it feels wrong to have 2 of your attacking spots when there are so many good options taken up by 2 Brentford players. So I understand that, but that is a bit of a false bias. I think there's really no difference, right? Wissa and Mbeumo are 2 different assets. Yes, it technically is a double up in your team, but you bringing in Wissa doesn't affect Mbeumo. Mbeumo is his own option, and Wissa is his own option. So I understand the feeling, because I feel the same. It feels a bit wrong having Mbeumo and Wissa, but we should be considering them as 2 separate assets, and Wissa is excellent. And the other thing I would say on Wissa is he's the cheapest of the options that we're considering at the moment. And as a result, a lot of people have this sort of price bias around him. So I understand all of those things, but Wissa's data is good. He takes a hell of a lot of shots. His conversion rate is sat at about 20% in previous seasons. So he's a decent finisher that's getting loads of chances and playing in a pretty good Brentford attack. And Brentford do score goals in the absence of Ivan Toney. So I really like Wissa with the fixtures coming up. I've spoken about Alvarez already, and Watkins probably goes from 3rd to 4th if you look over the next 5, because I think until about game week 8, when I think they've got Wolves, Aston Villa, I think up until then, the fixtures aren't great. And I think there are definitely better assets to target over the next sort of 5 weeks. But after that, when we move to sort of game week 8, game week 9 onwards, as you can see, Watkins then becomes the best option for me. So if you're looking longer term, if you're thinking, I don't want to change the forward, I'm sick and tired of changing my forward, I just want a player that I can keep in there, and I'm going to use my transfers on my midfield and my defence, then Ollie Watkins is the guy, because he's so consistent, his data's good, we know how good Aston Villa are under Emery. And I feel like he's going to be a really, really good option this season. I would expect Ollie Watkins this season to break 200 points, regardless of the loss of penalties. So if you're looking longer term, for me, it probably does have to be Ollie Watkins. I still feel like Jackson is good long term, but it is really those sort of next 5 or 6 that you're looking to target for Chelsea. And then the only other player that I wanted to mention that probably just sneaks into the list, if you're looking over the next 8 game weeks, is Isak. Now, he does look like Newcastle's first choice. Yes, Wilson could start the odd game, but I do feel like Isak is going to be first choice this season. His data is very, very good when he starts, and Newcastle are a brilliant attack. And from maybe game week 5/game week 6 onwards, Newcastle's fixtures really improve, and I think we'll all be scrambling to bring in Newcastle. So again, if you're looking a bit longer term, and you don't want to keep using transfers on the forwards, Isak could be the one. The only other forward that I wanted to discuss that isn't here right now is João Pedro. There are rumours going around at the moment, and there's been nothing sort of concrete on it. We don't yet have a press conference update, but there are rumours going around that João Pedro Enciso, I should say, is injured, and it could be a long-term injury. And I feel like the main rotation for João Pedro is Enciso. Yes, Lallana can play there, but he's very injury-prone. Yes, they could play Welbeck and Ferguson together or put Matoma in the number 10, but I just don't think these are as likely as just giving João Pedro more minutes. So if Enciso is out, that makes João Pedro a much better option. We know he's on penalties. I still feel like he'll get okay minutes anyway. João Pedro probably going under the radar slightly and maybe unlucky not to get into the top 4 regardless of which sample size you're looking at. So to put that all together, the best forward for me at the moment is probably Jackson. Shorter term Alvarez, longer term Watkins. The final thing I just wanted to discuss on this, because I've been talking for almost 10 minutes on this subject, is if you have João Pedro or Watkins, would you sell them for Jackson or Alvarez? Because that seems to be a very popular question at the moment. I've got the same debate because I have João Pedro. So I'll discuss João Pedro first. I think this is a little bit easier than selling Ollie Watkins. The main reason for that is that his minutes will be lower. Regardless of what happens with Enciso, João Pedro will very rarely get 90 minutes and will quite often come off around 70 minutes. And I think that will be the case on a consistent basis. We've also heard comments from De Zerbi about the fact that he doesn't like the way João Pedro presses, etc. And there have been a few negative comments about that. So I think the minutes is the main thing. And also the fixtures coming up for Brighton are really not good from game week 4 to about game week 8 or 9. So I don't like the fixtures. His minutes aren't great. I feel like João Pedro is a much easier sell. However, this week, I think it's a good fixture at home. I expect him to start, and again, he is on penalty. So I don't think you need to rush João Pedro out this week, but I feel like it is a much easier sell to one of Alvarez and Jackson. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to want to hear this, Ollie Watkins owners. I don't like the idea of selling Watkins this week. I actually don't like the idea particularly of selling Watkins at all. The reason for that is I feel like if you ask me who's going to score the most points out of Watkins, Jackson, Alvarez over the next 5, I would back Jackson. But if you told me it was Watkins, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I'm really shocked about that. I'd say, yeah, probably. He's very consistent, playing in a very good attack, and they are gelling very well at the moment. He looks great, linking up with Bailey and also Diaby too. And I back Watkins to tick along really nicely. And then you've not wasted 2 transfers, taking Watkins out and then having to bring him back in as well. The only caveat on that I would say is that it feels like quite a passive move. Yes, it maybe makes sense on paper to keep Watkins because he's a great attacker with okay fixtures over the next couple and he will score goals. But it also feels very passive when the fixtures that Jackson have coming up and also the fixtures that Alvarez has over the next 2. So I don't mind selling him. If I had him, I'd keep him at least another week. I think that Watkins against Burnley versus Jackson against Luton, you would maybe back Jackson slightly, but maybe not worth the transfer this week. I don't mind selling him in the short term, but just realise that around game week 8, you're going to want Ollie Watkins back. So is it worth 2 transfers for you? Do you back Jackson and Alvarez? If you value a transfer at 4 points, do you back Jackson/Alvarez, whoever you bring in, to outscore Watkins by more than 8 points over the next 5 or 6 weeks? I don't necessarily know the answer to that. So I'll stop there because that has been an incredibly long section. But yeah, it's Jackson for me, as with a lot of people. I still back him to do well with the fixtures. I like Alvarez short term, Watkins long term. So another question that a lot of people had is around Gabriel. So he fell in price to 4.9 million. Let's say that you haven't already sold him, you kept him, and you've now obviously suffered 1 price fall. Do you continue to keep him and risk that it will keep falling in price? Or do you look to sell him? And if you do look to sell him, is it this week, next week? And who should you look to replace Gabriel with? Around the price fall, he's already fallen, right? You've already lost that 0.1 million. At the moment, 0.1 million is essentially 0.5 million. A lot of players haven't changed in price. So if you were looking to bring in a £5 million defender, it doesn't really matter now if Gabriel is 4.9 or 4.8, right? You can't afford a 5 million. So I almost feel like if he drops 0.1 versus 0.2, there's not a massive amount in it at the moment with respect to how much that will influence your future transfer. So that is one thing to think about. The other thing to think about is he going to drop to 4.8? Because I think a lot of people, myself included, are predicting Gabriel to probably start against Fulham because Timber is injured, Tomiyasu is suspended, and Zinchenko's back. And all of those things would lead us to think that Zinchenko will play the inverted role and Gabriel could be playing at left centre-back. Now, we don't know that for certain. There clearly appears to be an issue as to why Gabriel is not favoured at the moment. But if we expect him to start, he could get a clean sheet, could maybe get an attacking return against the Fulham side that struggle from set pieces. He probably won't drop to 4.8 anyway. So you've already suffered what is likely going to be the only price drop on him. Unless he's benched again, if he does miss out once again, then you probably would expect him to fall in price to 4.8. And you probably have lost a little bit of extra money on him. All of that to say, I'd be happy starting him this week. I think Fulham is a good chance for a clean sheet. As we said, he's good from set pieces. Fulham are poor defending set pieces. The other thing you could do is if you have something like, for example, I've got Udogie on the bench. I have Saliba instead, but let's say I had Gabriel. Well, I would simply probably just bench Gabriel and play Udogie if you have any doubts about whether he starts. Because I feel like another week's worth of information could be useful. Because If Gabriel does start and he looks good and we get some positive comments from Arteta in the press conference afterwards, then perhaps we could see a run of games where Gabriel does continue to start, because we've already seen him in the past say that he thinks that Gabriel played an important role this season. I can't remember if it was in Game Week 1 or Game Week 2, but it would suggest that he's not out of his plans by any means. I know there have been rumours about him moving to Saudi Arabia and potentially moving out of the league to different teams, but let's say he does stay, which looks more likely now. I would expect Arteta to want to play him this season, and we know he is a top-class defender, so basically, to put all of that together, I know it's easy for me to say because I don't own him. It's a lot easier for someone to say, well, I would keep that player. As with Watkins, really, it's easier for me to sit here as non-owners and say I would keep them. But I probably would, because I have a Dogi on the bench and I'll be perfectly happy playing a Dogi this week. But I feel like maybe if you are reliant on him and you just want to get rid, because I know you've got that whole case of, well, he's fooled you once and he's fooled you twice. Maybe you get rid of him and you don't allow him to do it on a third occasion. Like, I fully understand that. But for me, I would probably keep him, get another week's worth of information, hope that you don't have a second prize fall, and then reassess going into Game Week 4, especially as he also has a much trickier fixture against Manchester United in Game Week 4. If you are to replace Gabriel, I think there are 3 options. Let's say you are priced out of the 5.5s, you don't want to move to a City defender, because obviously they're more expensive, or you just don't want to risk with Pep Roulette. I think there are 3 options at the £4.5 million price bracket that I really like. I think Udogie is one. I feel like he's got good attacking threat. He's got good fixtures coming up as well, and I like him as an option. I feel like Colwill, not necessarily the attacking threat, but decent bonus points, looks relatively nailed, and the fixtures we know are there for Chelsea. And then Rico Henry. Whilst I think he's much better when they play a 5 at the back or /a 3 at the back when he's playing almost like a winger, I think he will do much better for you then, and they tend to play a 4 at the back in the easier fixtures. But regardless, he is very creative. Brentford are a decent enough defence, and the fixtures are there, as I said, with Spurs and with Chelsea too. So it would be Colwill, Udogie, and Henry that I'd be looking to replace Gabriel with. So that's my opinion on it. If you still have Gabriel, I would love to know what you're thinking of doing down below in the comments. So guys, sticking with the theme of Arsenal, we have a couple of things to discuss. Those are Gabriel Jesus back in training, and also a bit of confusion around who is the penalty taker for Arsenal, because it is incredibly important. We'll start with Gabriel Jesus being back. This is great news for Saka and Martinelli. I don't know when Gabriel Jesus will be back in the team starting. It could be very soon. We haven't actually got an update on that yet. We don't actually know how well the training session went, or I haven't seen anything anyway. But let's assume he's back quite soon. They might not rush him back before the international break is my only concern. So it may be from Game Week 5 onwards, but that's just a bit of hypothesizing. Once he is back, we know that Saka and Martinelli in particular, their data is much better with Jesus in the team. Because when Nketiah plays, he hogs all of the big chances. A lot goes through the centre. And Martinelli and Saka look very wide, and they don't tend to get too involved, and their goal threat isn't particularly high. So this is great news for Martinelli and Saka owners, assuming you want to hold them until Gabriel Jesus is back. The only thing that I could see it being a negative impact on Gabriel Martinelli with is that now, when Trossard comes on, there's no chance of Trossard coming on for Nketiah. Obviously, he could still come on for Jesus, but we've seen potentially the idea that obviously Trossard could come on for Nketiah, and then one of Havertz or Trossard goes into the 9 role and the other one sticks as the number 8. Now, if Trossard comes on the pitch, you would almost always expect it to be for Gabriel Martinelli. So it could mean that Gabriel Martinelli gets even more early subs, and you could conceivably see Trossard starting a game instead of Martinelli as well. So this could cause more rotation for Martinelli, but I would expect it to make him a better asset when he's on the pitch. The other thing to discuss around Arsenal is, as I said, this penalty confusion. So essentially, we all expected Saka to still be on penalties, or most of us did anyway. A few people were already having rumours around him not being on penalties again this season, and you were correct. Because what happened is Saka stood up there with the ball in his hands, and then he passed it to Martin Odegaard. Now, there are 2 quotes that I just wanted to discuss in relation to this to try and understand about what will happen moving forward. One's from Arteta, one's from Odegaard. Arteta said after the game that he had absolutely no clue that Odegaard would take the penalty, and he said that it was a decision taken by the players. So it was made either on the pitch or before the game or whatever it may be. We knew that it was a decision made by the players. Odegaard then followed that up in a post-match press conference and said, "We've been taking penalties a lot in pre-season, and I've scored all of mine. So I just asked him, Bukayo Saka, and he gave it to me. So I have to thank him for that one." So, by all accounts, that confirms what Arteta said. It was a decision made by the players. This suggests that it was made on the day during the game. It sounds like as the penalty was given, Odegaard looked at Bukayo Saka and said, "I want it." That being said, the fact that he scored so many in pre-season, and maybe Saka hasn't, this kind of infers, you might think that it's also a bit, maybe it was decided before the game slightly, or at least they'd had a bit of a chat about it, because I doubt Saka would have been first choice penalty taker confirmed. Odegaard just goes, "Oi, mate, can I have that penalty, please?" And Saka's like, "Yes, absolutely fine." There must have been some kind of discussion already. So my interpretation of this, and it is only an interpretation, is that Odegaard will be on penalties moving forward. I don't think this was just a one-off. But what this also tells me is that it could quite conceivably at any point switch back. So if Bukayo Saka fancies it, he could just look at Ødegaard and say, "Oi, Ødegaard, I kind of fancy this penalty." And maybe even the same with other players. Maybe Martinelli takes a penalty too. We did see that in, was it last season or the season before? Martinelli took a penalty towards the back end of the season. So it could be that they're just passed around and it keeps oppositions on their toes. I've seen a few people hypothesize that that's a good thing because goalkeepers don't know who to prepare for, and it's a shock kind of who's going to step up and take the penalty. So yeah, maybe they do get passed around. But if I were to predict moving forward, I would expect it to be Ødegaard. I know I've seen some people say, well, this suggests it was a one-off, right? Of course, Saka's still doing pens. Ødegaard just wanted this one, which of course could be the case. What I would say is whoever's on pens is the best option. And I said this anyway because Martinelli's got the best data, but he doesn't ever play 90 minutes, which drops him as probably the third best asset realistically. He's got really high upside, but he doesn't play enough minutes. Ødegaard and Saka don't have the best data. Neither of them have good enough data for me to justify having them in your team if they don't have penalties. So the reason that I went for Saka instead of Ødegaard, as well as not knowing about Ødegaard's new role, is because Saka had the penalties. And I know you might say, well, Saka only scored a few penalties last year, but it's the ability to get them. We saw what happened with Mbeumo. Yes, that was a freak instant getting 2-in-2, but this is why you have them, because you can get those extra points. So the reason I had Saka was for the penalties. If Ødegaard suddenly got penalties and he takes the next one, Ødegaard's a better option than Saka for me. So this is something to think about. It does make me think that maybe Saka isn't the option we think he is, and you could potentially gain an advantage by selling him. But the last thing you would want to do before seeing a second penalty is sell Saka and then he steps up and takes it. So maybe we'll get this cleared up in the future in a press conference, or maybe we'll get a second penalty in Game Week 3 or Game Week 4 and it'll become a lot more apparent. I would love to know what you think down below. Who do you think's on penalties for Arsenal? I just wanted to say this is something we should definitely keep our eye on. So building on the previous section, this will be a little bit shorter because I've already discussed that I think Martinelli's a minutes risk and Saka not on pens isn't a great option. But obviously a lot of us, myself included, have a five-man midfield including Rashford, Fernandes, Saka and Martinelli. Manchester United have been utterly stinky in the opening 2 game weeks, and Arsenal haven't been as good as we saw them at points last season either. And as I said, with Nketiah, they don't look great either. Now, there are so many issues with trying to answer this question as to who is the priority to sell, because it could quite easily change in the coming weeks. As things stand, Rashford is a big issue for me because I don't like him as the number 9. I don't think he'll perform well, and I think it affects Manchester United overall having Rashford through the centre and not on the left. So at the moment, I think Rashford is a bigger issue than Fernandes for me. And then when we look at Arsenal, I think both Saka and Martinelli are issues because they're not getting enough chances to score goals. Martinelli is a minutes risk and Saka might not be on penalties. So I look at all 4 of them and I think all 4 are issues. I would actually probably say, despite it being the opposite of what everyone else thinks, I would say Bruno is the least of an issue out of these 4. The issue that I've got answering that question, though, convincingly, is that Rashford, I would expect to move back out to the left soon. There are varying reports going around. I was trying to get a reliable source. Half the reports are saying that Højlund will not be available until after the international break, and half the reports are saying that he might make his debut this weekend. So I don't really know, but once Højlund is available, Rashford goes out to the left and we start Højlund. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I think he'll actually be rushed into the starting 11 because we desperately need him. But I also think we could see what we saw in pre-season where Sancho plays through the middle and Rashford plays on the left. So if Rashford goes out to the left, all of a sudden I don't like the idea of selling him. And then the other thing to note is once Jesus is back, I think both Martinelli and Saka are better options. And if Saka is on penalties, then he's not an issue for me. So I can't really answer this convincingly because there are 3, 4, 5 things that are massively up in the air that would all impact the way that I would answer this question. But to put all of that together, I think the only one that you can argue a good case to be sold regardless of all of that stuff is Martinelli, because he's the only one that is a serious minutes risk. He is the only one that I could really see being benched because Trossard is that good for me. And they've got Smith Rowe as well, and they could even try some sort of other formation out. You never know with Arteta. He's a bit like Pep. And so Martinelli for me is a serious risk of being benched, but he's also very, very likely to get early substitutions as well. Around 60 to 70 minutes, you would not be surprised to see him come off. So he's the only one that I think you could definitely say, yeah, you can sell him regardless of what happens. So I would prioritize him. Out of the other 3, Bruno for me is not an issue because his data is always really, really good. The Mount injury might positively influence him slightly, but I just feel like with pens, with set pieces, with the data that we've seen in the opening 2, Bruno's the least of an issue for me. I would probably say it's Marcus Rashford, especially because he is the most expensive of the assets as well. And I know we don't necessarily need the money, but you might need it in the future to potentially move to the likes of a Trippier. So having that money in the bank might be useful. So for me, roughly for now, I would say Martinelli's the biggest issue, then Rashford, then Saka, then Fernandes. But all of that could change based on the stuff that I've said. If you've got this midfield, do let me know what you plan on doing with it this week. again, go watch my team selection video if you haven't already. This is my midfield plus Mbeumo, and I'm looking to keep them because the fixtures are so good this week. But in game week 4, when Manchester United play against Arsenal, I'm looking at selling Martinelli and then maybe one of my Manchester United midfielders. So there was also questions around the £6.5 million midfielders. We did discuss Mbeumo in a lot of detail in the game week preview video. So if you want more around Mbeumo, you can go back and watch that one. But there were questions around, do you need a 6 point... And again, they're not all 6.5 now. Some have dropped, some have risen. But let's just say the 6.5-ish midfielders. Do you need one? Like, if you haven't got one, I've seen some people with the midfield 4 that I just spoken about, plus like a Maddison, Foden, Richarlison. Should you just get that price point in place and move to an Mbeumo or a Mitoma or a March? And then the other question is, if you have Eze in particular is one that I got a few questions on. If you have Eze, who is really not struggled in the opening 2, but he's obviously got no returns, and he's also playing quite a deep role. I know his data's not terrible in the opening 2, but when I watched Palace, and I watched both games, he was almost playing like more like a number 8 than a number 10 at points. He does obviously drift to the edge of the box too, but he was almost trying to create from deep, which we've seen Bruno do a little bit in the past as well. It's not the end of the world, but if I had Eze, would I move to Mbeumo, March, Mitoma? So I think it is worth having one of these assets or 2 of these assets, but not necessarily for the price point, just because they are good players. Like, ignore the price largely. They are performing really well, and I think they will continue to perform well as well. There aren't many premium options in FPL this year, so I feel like you should almost ignore price for the most part and just pick the players that you think will do well. And I think some of the lower price players this year will probably be some of the highest scorers too. Mbeumo is still the best option for me. He will consistently be the best option due to minutes, fixtures, and penalties. Once the fixtures change, of course, maybe you can look elsewhere. I do like Mitoma in March. Their data's good, and Brighton are just such a good attack. They will score goals for fun, and they will continue to do so. The fixtures just aren't really there from game week 4. So I feel like if you don't already own Mitoma and or March, now is probably not the time to bring them in. It was for the opening 2 or 3 fixtures that you really wanted them in your team. So to answer the question around Eze, I would be tempted to keep Eze, but if you are looking to sell him, the only one that I would want to move to is Mbeumo. I suppose I don't mind moving to a Diaby or a Brighton mid, but that feels like a very sideways move. The only move that feels like a bit of an upgrade for me, just due to the fact that he gets similar minutes to Eze, is also on penalties, is also on set pieces too, but is playing in a better attack with better data and better fixtures, is Eze to Mbeumo. I feel like that is the only one you upgrade. But at this stage, that will cost you an extra 0.3 million. So it's not going to be easy to make the move from Eze to Mbeumo. So basically, I would probably just keep Eze. If it was me, I would probably just risk it. Hope that Mbeumo starts to regress back to the mean slightly, and his data drops down because he won't continue to get that many penalties. Hope that Eze gets penalties as well. You have to realise, Eze and Mbeumo are both on penalties. Eze could have quite easily had 2 penalties in the opening 2, and all of a sudden this would be a very, very different topic to discuss. So hope that Eze gets penalties, hope Mbeumo doesn't, and hope that he starts to improve. I probably wouldn't be using my transfers to switch around the £6.5 million-ish midfielders at the moment. I feel like that is quite a luxury transfer. So unless the rest of your team is absolutely perfect and you're happy with all of it, and you've got 2 free transfers, I'd probably just stick with the one you've got at the moment. So in the middle of me recording this video, we've got an extra section because we've just had an update on James Maddison. So to timestamp this, I'm recording it Thursday at about 4 PM. And we've just had an update that he wasn't in team training today. And of course, the game's in less than 48 hours. I think there's a very good chance that James Maddison is not available for Game Week 3 as a result. Should just know that Postecoglou will have his press conference on Friday, probably around 1:30 PM usually in the afternoon. So we're going to have an update on James Maddison, hopefully, and that will help you a lot. But I think deciding what to do with Maddison really depends on your team. I feel like if you've got like 8 good attackers, and let's say you've already got some like a João Pedro on the bench, or maybe even a decent 4th defender like a Udogie or someone like that, and you want to bring them on, and you've been wanting to play them anyway, maybe you could just keep Maddison an extra week, because I think you've got the squad depth there, it avoids a benching headache, and you've got a decent player to come in. Because if Maddison is only out short term, you're going to want him back. And then of course, the other thing is depending on is what does Postecoglou say? Because if he says that James Maddison only has a minor injury, we'll reassess him after the weekend and it's nothing serious, then if he's back for Game Week 4 or Game Week 5, you're going to want him back in your team. So it really does depend what update we get there. If he is confirmed out for longer than a week, if Postecoglou says it's a few weeks or it's not serious, but he's definitely not fit for this one, and we're worried that he won't be back for Game Week 4/Game Week 5, then of course you look to sell him, because you don't want to hold a player, especially as it's the next 3 fixtures for Spurs, which are really good. Then they've got 2 or 3 tricky ones, and then the fixtures get better after that. So you don't want to keep him for the good fixtures on the bench, then bring him back in for the tricky ones. It probably doesn't make sense. If you are looking to sell James Maddison and you decide based on whatever happens in the press conference that you want to move him on, I feel like there are two standout options, and those are Foden and Mbeumo. I feel like Foden's got the high upside over the next two. The data's pretty good. He's playing as a 10 alongside Alvarez, and he looks to absolutely excel in that more central role. So I love the look of Foden. And then Mbeumo, we've spoken about in the previous section. Pens, good minutes, good data, good fixtures. It's a no-brainer option if you don't already have Mbeumo. So those are the two for me that I would look at. Outside of that, let's say you've already got those two or you want to take a punt elsewhere. I think Raheem Sterling could be an excellent shout. I know a lot of people won't like that, but I think he could do really well with the fixtures coming up. And if you want to go for a little bit of a safer punt, maybe someone like a Diaby or an Eze could do really well, or even go for a Brighton midfielder, despite the slightly trickier fixtures, or maybe bring in an Arsenal or Man United midfielder, because they're not going to continue to be poor forever. But for me, it's Foden and Mbeumo are the best replacements for Maddison. If you do have Maddison, let me know what you're doing with him down below in the comments. So the final thing was, quite a few people are wildcarding this week, and I think it is the best week to wildcard yet. I think it's better than both Game Week 1 and Game Week 2, but there is value to saving it. Quickly, the value in saving your wildcard is, of course, if you play your wildcard 1 now, and you don't play your wildcard 2 until when most of us play it, which is around Game Week 30, you've got to now go like 27 game weeks with the same team. So it becomes very, very tricky. And the other reason is there are some pretty considerable fixture swings coming up around Game Week 8, Game Week 9, if you still don't want to hold it too long. And then another really good time to play is around Game Week 18, Game Week 19, because it's smack bang in the middle of the season, and it allows you to have a little bit of a shorter spell with your first wildcard. And obviously, you've already almost essentially had a wildcard in Game Week 1, right? At the start of the season, you had unlimited transfers. So it feels like you're almost playing like back-to-back wildcards. On top of that, the transfer window is still open, and there is an international break after Game Week 4. So there are a few things that could mean that a Game Week 3 wildcard might look great now, but it might not necessarily pan out that way. So if you can hold it, I probably would. But let's say you are looking to play it this week because you made a few mistakes with your team. Maybe you're new to FPL and you just want to make sure that your team is set up for the future. It is largely similar to a lot of the teams that we've seen already. So I've gone for a 4.5 in Flecken, rotating with Turner, Chilwell, Estepinian, Fernandes, Saka, Mbeumo, Haaland, Jackson. Even a Dogi and maybe Archer, like 9 or 10 of the players are what a lot of people will have. Some of them may be slightly different things. I've gone for a City defender, so I've got Ruben Dias in there because the City clean sheets are looking very likely over the coming weeks. The fixtures are good, and I feel like Ruben Dias is one of the more nailed City defenders. And then the midfield, I've gone really, really punty with quite a few of them. So I've gone for Raheem Sterling for the fixtures. You could go for anyone else in there if you wanted to. I've got Foden in there as well. I feel like with the fixtures coming up, that may be less of a punt, but high upside, maybe a bit of a rotation risk, but probably worth it. So Sterling and Foden, high upside, maybe not confirmed minutes, but with the fixtures there, always showing good data, always goal threats. I like the idea of having those two in there. And then the other slightly different thing about this team is I've actually got Kieran Trippier on the bench because from Game Week 5 onwards, Newcastle have a fixture swing. And of course, you won't have your wild card to target that in the coming weeks. So maybe just getting Trippier in there ahead of the curve, saving a transfer could be a good idea because you've got money in the bank in this team. You don't necessarily need to keep all that money. You could equally go for a Fabian Schär or a Botman if you wanted to, but I feel like Trippier is worth the extra money. And from around Game Week 5 onwards, everyone's going to probably want Trippier back and you're going to be ahead of the curve. So this team is rated at 98% according to Fantasy Football Hub. All of the stuff that I've used today to inform my decision making and also this team feature is from Fantasy Football Hub. You can check them out. Links will be down below in the description. But I think it's a pretty good team, and this is roughly what I would be going with on a wildcard. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 3 deadline decisions video. Again, if you are enjoying this series a little bit closer to the deadline where I dissect all of the latest news and help you with your dilemmas, please do smash a like and make sure to subscribe. We are on the road to 100,000 subscribers. And as I said at the start of the video, if you'd like to support me a little bit and also check out a really good free-to-play app, do check out Kickoff by Zuzu. There'll be a link down below, the top link in the description. Give it a check, download it. It's free to play. If you don't enjoy it, then there's no harm done, but it does support me, and I also am really, really enjoying the game. Until next time, which will be the deadline stream on Friday, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.